line under matters. But I want to reassure the House, Mr. Speaker, and the country that I and the whole government are focused 100% on dealing with the people's priorities, including the UK's leading role in protecting freedom around the world. And with permission, I will make a statement about the United Kingdom's response to the situation in Ukraine. This winter, we've witnessed a spectacle that we hope to be banished from our continent. A large and powerful country massing troops and tanks on the border of a neighbour with the obvious threat of invading. Russia has, of course, already attacked Ukraine, illegally annexing 10,000 square miles of her territory in 2014, igniting a war in the Donbass region, and Ukraine has scarcely known a day of peace ever since. Now Ukraine faces the danger of a renewed invasion, and this time the force arrayed on Ukraine's frontier comprises over 100,000 troops, far bigger than anything Russia has deployed against her before. If the worst happens and the destructive firepower of the Russian army were to engulf Ukraine's towns and cities, I shudder to contemplate the tragedy that would ensue. Ukrainians have every moral and legal right to defend their country, and I believe their resistance would be dogged and tenacious, and the bloodshed comparable to the first war in Chechnya or Bosnia, Mr. Speaker, or any other conflict that Europe has endured since 1945. No one would gain from such a catastrophe. Russia would create a wasteland in a country which, as she continuously reminds us, is composed of fellow Slavs, and Russia would never be able to call it peace. For months, Britain has worked in lockstep with the United States and our allies across Europe to avoid such a disaster. We've sought to combine dialogue with deterrence, emphasising how a united Western alliance would exact a forbidding price for any Russian incursion into Ukraine, including by imposing heavy economic sanctions. And at the same time, we stand ready, as we always have, to address any legitimate Russian concerns through honest diplomacy. On the 13th of December, I spoke to President Putin, and I stressed that NATO had no thought of encircling or otherwise threatening his country, and that Russia enjoyed as much right as any other state to live in peace and security. But, as I said to him, Ukraine also enjoys an equal and symmetrical right to that of Russia. And I said that any attack on his neighbour would be followed by tougher sanctions against Russia, further steps to help Ukraine defend herself, and by an increased NATO presence to protect our allies on NATO's eastern flank. The truth is that Russia's goal is to keep NATO forces away from her borders. If that is Russia's goal, then invading Ukraine could scarcely be more counterproductive. My right honourable friends, the Foreign and Defence Secretaries, have both conveyed the same message to President Putin, and I'm prepared, of course, ready to speak to him again. Meanwhile, the American Deputy Secretary of State met her Russian counterpart in Geneva on the 10th of January, and the NATO-Russia Council gathered 2 days later, as the House knows. The American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, met the Russian Foreign Minister last Friday, and the US administration has confirmed President Biden's willingness to have another meeting with President Putin, continuing the bilateral dialogue they began last year. But credible deterrence is the other side of the coin. Last night I held a virtual meeting with President Biden, President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, President Duda, Prime Minister Draghi, General Secretary Stoltenberg, President Michel, and President von der Leyen. We agreed that we would respond in unison to any Russian attack on Ukraine, in unison, by imposing coordinated and severe economic sanctions, heavier than anything we have done before against Russia. And we agreed on the necessity of finalising these measures as swiftly as possible in order to maximise their deterrent effect. We in the UK will not hesitate to toughen our national sanctions against Russia in response to whatever President Putin may do, and the House will soon hear more on this from my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary. We've already declassified compelling intelligence exposing Russian intent to install a puppet regime in Ukraine, and we will continue to disclose any Russian use of cyber attacks, false flag operations, or disinformation. Amid all these pressures, Ukraine asks for nothing except to be allowed to live in peace and to seek her own alliances, as every sovereign country has a right to do. Last week, the UK acted to strengthen Ukraine's ability to defend her soil by supplying anti-armour missiles and deploying a small training team of British personnel, in addition to the work of Operation Orbital, which, as the House will know, has trained 21,000 Ukrainian troops since 2015. Yesterday, we took the responsible precaution of temporarily withdrawing some staff and dependents from the British Embassy in Kiev, though I emphasise that the Embassy remains open and will continue to provide consular assistance for British nationals in Ukraine. And I'm particularly grateful for the dedication of our ambassador in Kiev, Melinda Simmons. I commend our NATO allies for the steps they've taken and undertaking to protect the eastern flank of the alliance. Denmark is sending a frigate to the Baltic and deploying 4 F-16s to Lithuania to join NATO's long-standing air policing mission. France has expressed its readiness to send troops to Romania under NATO command. And the United States has raised the alert level of 8,500 combat troops, preparing to deploy them in Europe at short notice. The British Army leads the NATO battle group in Estonia, and if Russia invades Ukraine, we would look to contribute to any new NATO deployments to protect our allies in Europe. In every contact with Russia, the UK and our allies have stressed our unity and our adherence to vital points of principle. We cannot bargain away the vision of a Europe whole and free that emerged in those amazing years from 1989 to 1991, healing the division of our continent by the Iron Curtain. We will not reopen that divide by agreeing to overturn the European security order because Russia has placed a gun to Ukraine's head. Nor can we accept the doctrine implicit in Russian proposals that all states are sovereign, but some are more sovereign than others. The draft treaty published by Russia in December would divide our continent once again between free nations and countries whose foreign and defence policies are explicitly constrained by the Kremlin in ways that Russia would never accept for herself. More than half of Europe, including a dozen or more members of NATO and of the European Union, would be only partially sovereign and required to seek the Kremlin's approval before inviting any military personnel from NATO countries onto their soil. The Czech Republic, at the very heart of Europe, hundreds of miles from Russia, would have to ask the Kremlin for permission if she wanted to invite a company of German infantry to join an exercise or even to help with flood defences. There is nothing new about large and powerful nations using the threat of brute force to terrify reasonable people into giving way to otherwise completely unacceptable demands. But if President Putin were to choose the path of bloodshed and destruction, he must realise that it would be both tragic and futile. And nor should we allow him to believe that he could easily take some smaller portion of Ukraine to salami slice because the resistance will be ferocious. Anyone who has been to Kiev, as I have, and stood by the wall of remembrance, studied the portraits of nearly 4,500 Ukrainians who've died in defence of their country since 2014. The total death toll stands in excess of 14,000. Anyone who's been there will know that the Ukrainians are determined to fight and have become steadily more skilled at guerrilla warfare. And if Russia pursues this path, many Russian mothers' sons will not be coming home. And the response in the international community would be the same and the pain that will be inflicted on the Russian economy will be the same. When I spoke to President Putin, I also reminded him that at crucial moments in history, Britain and Russia have stood together. The only reason why both our countries are permanent members of the UN Security Council is because of the heroism of Soviet soldiers in the struggle against fascism, side by side with ourselves. I believe that all of Russia's fears could yet be allayed, and we could find a path to mutual security through patient and principled diplomacy, provided that President Putin avoids the trap of starting a terrible war, and, Mr. Speaker, a war that I believe would earn and would deserve the condemnation of history, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. And I'm grateful to the Defence Secretary for keeping the opposition informed of developments throughout the crisis. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Britain, Russia and the United States made a solemn agreement with Ukraine. In exchange for giving up nuclear powers and weapons, Ukraine's security was to be guaranteed and its independence would be respected. Ukraine has kept its end of the deal. President Putin has not. His Russia has annexed Crimea, supported separatist conflict in Donbass, and now massed over 100,000 troops on Ukraine's borders. These are repeated and unjustifiable acts of aggression. So Labour stands resolute in our support of Ukraine's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. And that was made clear when our Shadow Foreign Secretary and Shadow Defence Secretary visited Kiev a fortnight ago, and I made it clear to the Ukrainian ambassador when I met him last week. This isn't just a local dispute on the other side of the continent. It's an attempt by President Putin to turn back the clock, to re-establish Russian force as a means of dominance over parts of Eastern Europe. And it's a direct threat to the anti-imperialist principle that sovereign nations are free to choose their own allies and choose their own way of life. That is why it is crucial that we in this House are united in opposing Russian aggression. So let me be clear. The Labour Party supports the steps that the government has taken to bolster Ukraine's ability to defend itself. We support international efforts to deter Russia from further aggression and the vital diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the situation. Can the Prime Minister assure the House that during talks, the UK and our partners will be resolute in our defence of Ukraine's sovereignty and the security of our NATO allies? For too long, the implicit message to Moscow has been that President Putin can do what he likes and the West will do little to respond. We must now change course and show Russia that any further aggression will result in severe real-world consequences. For Britain and our allies, that will mean taking tough decisions. That won't be easy. Widespread and hard-hitting sanctions must include cutting Russia's access to the international financial system. Europe's over-reliance on Russian energy supplies is well documented, and it simply must be addressed. And in Britain, we have failed to rid our economic and political systems of the ill-gotten money used to support the Putin regime. If we take our obligations to global security seriously, we cannot go on allowing ourselves to be the world's laundromat for illicit finance. Labour has a 4-point plan. Really? First, reform Companies House to crack down on shell companies. Second, a register of overseas entities to lift the veil on who owns property and assets in the UK. Thirdly, tougher regulation on political donations. And finally, implement the recommendations of the cross-party Russia support to bolster national security. So I ask, will the Prime Minister support these measures to rid the UK of the loot of the corrupt Russian elite? We cannot stand up to Russian aggression abroad while facilitating Russian corruption at home. After the chemical attacks in Salisbury, after the annexation of Crimea, and now the threat of invasion in Ukraine, it's time to send a simple, clear and united message. We support Ukraine's sovereign right to choose her own destiny. We will stand with the Ukrainian people in the face of President Putin's threats. His aggression will come at a high price for himself and his regime. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman, and I must say that I'm very glad that he supports the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. And he's right to ask about the assurances that this country has given to Ukraine. And I must say that I have repeatedly told Volodymyr Zelensky, as I told his predecessor, Petro Poroshenko, many times, we stand foursquare behind the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine, Mr. Speaker, and we always will. And we have a hard-hitting package of sanctions ready to go. What I think would be fair to say is we want to see our European friends ready to deploy that package as soon as there should be any incursion at all by Russia into Ukraine. He asks about what we're doing to track down Russian money in this country and in this city. As he knows, we're bringing forward measures for a register of beneficial interest, Mr. Speaker, but I don't think there's any country in the world that has taken tougher action against the Putin regime. It was this government that brought in Magnitsky sanctions against all those involved in the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, Mr. Speaker, and it was this government that got the world together, got 28 countries together to protest against the poisoning that took place in Salisbury. And the world responded to that British lead, Mr. Speaker, by collectively expelling 153 diplomats around the world. And what I can tell him, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to him for the general tenor of his intervention and for the support that he is giving to NATO, belated though it may be from the benches opposite. But I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for it now, Mr. Speaker. And what I can tell him now, Mr. Speaker, is that that same leadership in assembling a response to Russian aggression is being shown by the UK now, and it is absolutely vital that the West, is united now, because it is our unity now that will be much more effective in deterring any Russian aggression, and that is what this government will be pursuing in the days ahead.
Tobias Ellwood, the
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister articulates, the West is now regrouping, but the penny is also dropping. The threat of sanctions will not deter this Russian aggression, and a total or even partial invasion will have severe economic and security consequences felt right across Europe and beyond. Ukraine's grain exports will be affected towards Africa. Global gas prices will be impacted and skyrocket. And where might an emboldened Russia turn to next? So I ask the government to liaise with the United States and now consider a more simpler and effective option to deter this invasion by belatedly answering Ukraine's call for help. It is not too late to mobilize a sizable NATO presence in Ukraine, utilizing the superior hard power the alliance possesses to make Putin think twice about invading another European democracy.
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and I know that he will, emotionally, many people will share what my honourable friend says, and he knows a great deal about Ukraine and about the issues that country faces. And of course, instinctively, many people would yearn to send active physical support in the form of NATO troops to Ukraine. I have to tell him that I don't believe that to be a likely prospect in the near term. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but what we can do and what we are doing is sending troops to support Ukraine. I've mentioned the training operations that we're conducting under Operation Orbital, have done for the last 6 or 7 years, trained 21,000 Ukrainian troops. And, of course, we are now sending defensive weaponry, Mr. Speaker, defensive weaponry, which I think is entirely appropriate. 2,000 anti-tank weapons to the Ukrainians, and we join the Americans in that effort. As he knows, the Americans have sent about $650 million worth of military assistance to Ukraine. That is a vital thing to do, to stiffen Ukrainian resistance. But I think the real deterrent right now, Mr. Speaker, is that package of economic sanctions. That is what will bite, that is what will hurt Putin, and that, I hope, is what will deter him.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement, and join with the Leader of the Opposition in congratulating the Defence Secretary, who has made sure all through this that we've been kept informed of developments. It's most appreciated. And it is important, Mr. Speaker, that all of us in this House stand together in solidarity with our friends in Ukraine in defence of their sovereignty. We on these benches share the deep concern over the escalation of tension, the prospect of military aggression and that threat to Ukraine's sovereignty. Russia's actions in recent weeks and months of amassing troops, tanks and heavy military equipment near the border of Ukraine are unacceptable. We continue to support, above all, measures to resolve the crisis through diplomacy. So will the Prime Minister provide reassurance that work to deliver a peaceful and diplomatic outcome remains this government's main priority? The threat of bloodshed on European soil is what's at stake. As we stand with the people of Ukraine and understand the fears and concerns of Ukrainians across these islands, many of them who live in the UK but have family in Ukraine, the bedrock of NATO as a defensive alliance remains the solidarity between its member states, and it is clear that we need that united alliance. It is becoming increasingly apparent that should an incursion occur, what will be required is a tougher package of sanctions that are robust and that have real measurable impact. We on these benches have called for coordinated economic sanctions against the Putin regime and the banning of Russia from the SWIFT banking system. Can this be confirmed as being on the table today? These measures must also include tougher action on Russian money laundering and include action by the Treasury to tackle the ongoing and improper use of Scottish limited partnerships, which have been used to funnel millions of pounds in dirty money. Without this, our credibility lessens. And let me say to the Prime Minister, when he raised the issue of Majinsky, it was cross-party support that led to these sanctions. And he may well remember the meeting that I had with him when he was Foreign Secretary to make sure that we work collectively to deal with those threats. So, will the Prime Minister also commit to introduce a transparent system of company registration and proper reform of Companies House? Meanwhile, we all stand solidly with the people of Ukraine and urge the government to continue efforts for diplomacy as long as that is possible.
Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the right honourable gentleman to echo many of his sentiments, and he's completely right to say that we should pursue every possible diplomatic avenue in every appropriate forum, Mr. Speaker, whether it's the NATO-Russia Council, the UN, the OSCE, the G7, the Normandy format. We must follow every avenue. He's right to press on what we're doing to track dirty Russian money, for want of a better expression. That's why we have the unexplained wealth orders, and that's why we're bringing in measures to have a register of beneficial interests. He asks about SWIFT and financial transactions across the world, and there is no doubt that that would be a very potent weapon. I'm afraid it can only really be deployed with the assistance of the United States, though we are in discussions about that. I think the House needs to understand that one of the big issues that we all face in dealing with Ukraine and in dealing with Russia is the heavy dependence of our European friends in particular on Russian gas. And it was clear in the conversations last night that in this era of high gas prices, we are bumping up against that reality. So the job of our diplomacy now is to persuade and encourage our friends to go as far as they can to sort this out and to come up with a tough package of economic sanctions, because that is what the situation requires.
Chair of the Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend will remember when he was Foreign Secretary, the Foreign Affairs Committee published a report entitled Moscow's Gold, about dirty Russian money flowing through our system, and the call for us to have various registers of not only ownership but also foreign agents operating within our system. We've had a reminder only a week ago of why this is so important. Would he tell me what he is doing to work with partners across Europe to make sure that we stand together and do not just act as a voice outside the Kremlin, but make sure that Putin's acolytes who have profited from his kleptocratic regime act as voices inside the Kremlin, telling Putin what he is risking? Because the impressive work that the Defence Secretary has done in helping to support our Ukrainian friends could be undermined if the Kremlin doesn't listen to the very real danger that it faces today.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely right that the best way to get attention in the Kremlin and in Moscow generally is to have sanctions that are directed at the individual, like Magnitsky sanctions, for instance. But that is what we will be coming forward with, as well as sanctions that are directed at companies, Mr. Speaker, that are of crucial strategic Russian interest.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Kiev and Kramatorsk last week, we met politicians and community leaders who will not only be worrying for the future of their country, but will be worrying for they'll be fearful for their own lives. And I've been arguing for a very long time that the arguments that President Putin uses about Russian speakers in Ukraine are exactly the same as Adolf Hitler advanced over the Sudeten Germans in Czechoslovakia in the 1930s. I agree with the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee that we do need to see full implementation of the Moscow Gold report. I'm sure there will be other sanctions coming. I don't quite understand why we've only sanctioned 25% of the people that the American government have already sanctioned. But this House will stand ready alongside the Prime Minister if he needs to introduce further legislation, for instance, to seize Russian assets in the UK and to make sure that the unexplained wealth orders, which have only worked in 3 cases in the last 4 years, actually have an effect. We stand ready to stand by the Ukrainian people.
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and I think he's completely right in what he says. His analysis of Russian, certainly of Putin's intentions towards Ukraine. I'm sure he's read the 5,000-word essay by Vladimir Putin about Ukraine and the origins of Russia. It's clear what his psychological, what his emotional, the wellsprings of his thinking are. On sanctions, I'm grateful for what he says. We're bringing forward, as he knows, a statutory instrument greatly to toughen up the package of our ability to sanction people, and I hope he will support it.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. President Putin hasn't even waited for the gas to start flowing through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline before exploiting the stranglehold that has been building on the German economy. My right honourable friend has already indicated that it may be difficult for Germany to impose severe sanctions against Russia if this invasion goes ahead. So does he not agree with me that it is vital from our security's point of view that anyone with strong Russian or communist Chinese links should be kept well away from our own critical national infrastructure?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is completely right, and that's why we brought in measures to protect our national security, our national infrastructure, our critical national infrastructure, and to make sure that we are able to stop investment that we think will be detrimental to our national security, Mr. Speaker. And I'm afraid he's quite right to also what he says about the German dependence on Russian gas. We have to be respectful of this. The simple fact is that the UK, I think, of our gas supplies, about 3% comes from Russia. About 6% of German energy needs comes from Russian gas. So they are in a very different position from us. Their sacrifice is potentially very large, but we must hope that in the interests of peace, they are willing to make that sacrifice.
Ed Day.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement? It is right that we stand united across the House to support Ukraine and to stand against Russian aggression, which we should remember has already resulted in over 13,000 casualties in the last few years. The Prime Minister has rightly talked about gas being an issue in this debate, particularly on Russia, but indeed in Germany, but across Central and Eastern Europe. And it will also potentially impact this country with the threat of increased gas prices at a time when families are already facing rocketing heating bills. So could I ask him to take further action on energy, as I did during the Russian invasion of Crimea? And so, alongside all the measures he rightly proposed in his statement, will the Prime Minister convene a summit of G7 energy ministers, as we had back in 2014, to look at how we can improve short-term and medium-term energy security, protect consumers in this country and elsewhere against rocketing gas prices, and give ourselves a much stronger hand in the face of Putin's aggression?
Prime Minister.
I thank him also, by the way, Mr. Speaker. I think that much of the work that he did on renewables when he was in office was prescient and valuable for this country, and it's put us in a stronger position to resist the Russian gas blackmail. As I told the House just now, of our gas supplies, only 3% comes from Russia, but he's also right about the spike in prices. That's why we're working together with President Biden, with other colleagues, to see what we can do to increase the supply of gas, both to Europe and, of course, to this country as well.
Carl McCartney.
Thank you, Speaker. If Russia invades Ukraine, does my right honourable friend see the potential, as I do, that it will lead to a flood of refugees crossing from the Ukraine into the EU? So Poland, Romania and Slovakia could see massive flows of displaced people. Indeed, that may be a part of Putin's thinking. The EU is then so distracted and full of infighting RE refugees that it cannot respond militarily. What does my right honourable friend think the response from Brussels is going to be? Maybe the Poles should have a bus station at the border crossing ready to take them all to Germany and France, especially given it is Berlin and Paris that have watered down any NATO response thus far. Because if this massive flow of refugees happens, it may well be the end of the EU.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is making a very valuable point, because, of course, we have seen only recently how refugees from Belarus have been used as tools of political warfare, and we've got to be conscious of the potential of the Kremlin to trigger exactly the kind of refugee crisis that he describes.
Kievan Jones.
Thank you very much. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and agree with him that should Putin invade Ukraine, tough sanctions will be necessary. But the Putin regime relies and exists because it floats on an ocean of illegal and illicit finance, much of it that flows through the City of London. Yeah. Now, the Prime Minister just said that the UK has the strongest laws against such illicit money. I'm sorry, Prime Minister, that's just not true. Just look at what our allies in the United States are doing. Yeah. It is now time to attack that. That is the way to actually cripple this regime. And can you tell me when he is going to implement the Russia report and its recommendations? Because as my honourable friend from Rhondda said, if that needs emergency legislation to get it through, let's do it.
Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, forgive me. I want to repeat what he's right that it's vital to guard against Russian dirty money flowing through the world, and he's completely right in his analysis of the way the kleptocracy works. That's why we have the unexplained wealth orders. That's why we're bringing forward a register of beneficial interests, and we have a new corporate offence for failure to prevent tax evasion, Madam Deputy Speaker. And we will come down, and we do come down very hard on all those who are exploiting the City of London or anywhere else to wash dirty money.
Mark Pritchard.
I welcome the Prime Minister strongly underlining Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Just back in November, Madam Deputy Speaker, there was no unanimity across Europe, increased even across the Atlantic, on the issue of Ukraine. That has changed since, over the last few months, with the good offices of the Prime Minister's Office, Defence Secretary and Foreign Secretary. He mentions his conversation last night with Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The Germans are a critical part of all of this, both on diplomacy and defence. They are a key international partner and ally. We can do it with the Americans, we can do it with others, but it would be far more effective if we do it with the Germans.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is completely right, and I just want to say a word or two in praise of Olaf Scholz, because last night in conversation with him it was clear, as I've said to the House, how difficult this is for Germany. Nobody should be any doubt about that, but it was also clear that the new German Chancellor is determined to stand with the rest of the West, to have a united front, and amongst other things, of course, Germany has made it clear that Nord Stream 2 cannot go, they can't take part in Nord Stream 2 if there's a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister was absolutely right to say that Western unity is key. So could he explain why the UK began withdrawing some of our diplomats from Kiev this week, unlike most of the rest of NATO?
Prime Minister.
I thank him. We're actually in lockstep with the United States, and as he knows, we've kept at least 30 of our diplomats there, including Melinda Simmons, our outstanding ambassador. The UK presence continues to be very strong in Kiev, but those are sensible precautionary steps.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, I congratulate him and the Defence Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, for a very robust set of leadership with NATO and our European allies and with the United States. But does he not also agree that right now we are facing an even wider threat? Whilst it's Ukraine today, the powers of dictatorship have watched as we did nothing over Georgia, over Crimea, South Ossetia, and they've been encouraged. Even now, China is looking at Taiwan, watching what our reaction will be. Does he not agree now that we have to get our allies to recognise we must never put ourselves in the position when it comes to energy, such that we are dependent on these terrible regimes for our future? We need to get security in our energy now.
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is completely right in what he says about the need for us to guarantee the independence of our energy. That's why it's so vital that we're building our wind power and other renewables so fast, Madam Deputy Speaker. But he's also right in his analysis of what is happening. What Putin basically wants is to go back to the Yalta system of spheres of influence. And it's not just Ukraine, Madam Deputy Speaker, that he has his eye on. And therefore, this moment now matters for the whole geometry and security architecture of Europe, and we must stand firm.
Order. Short and concise questions, please, because I will be finishing this statement at 2:20. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The military reality is that President Putin knows that if he invades, he will not be facing NATO troops, and therefore the sanctions we put in place have to be the strongest possible. Is the Prime Minister not concerned that, given the answer he just gave about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the fact discussions are still continuing about exclusion from the SWIFT system, that we're not demonstrating determined, united resolve at the very moment where we need the credible threat of strong sanctions to try and deter him from invading Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
I thank him, and I think his point is very important. Actually, I think that we are making a huge amount of progress. And I want to thank my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary, for the work that they're doing, because I think we are bringing together the West on a very tough package, and that's what we need.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I remind the House we do actually guarantee the sovereignty of Ukraine by having signed the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, along with the United States and Russia, and I think later France and even China. But could I ask my right honourable friend if he agrees with me that if we really economically and financially strangle Russia with sanctions, Russia could well become bankrupt, and this alone might be something to cause Mr. Putin to blink before he gives agreement to using military power and turning it into military force?
Prime Minister.
my honourable friend is completely right that we have the potential to do very serious economic damage to Russia. What we have to make sure, as everybody said on the call last night, is that we don't inflict damage on the Western economies, just as people are suffering in particular from high gas prices. And that's what we've got to do. Don't forget, he's quite right, 41% of Russia's GDP comes from oil and gas.
Alison Toulis.
Speaker, the truth about unexplained wealth orders is that only a handful of them have been issued, and the Registration of Overseas Entities Bill has now been waiting for 4 years for action. So when the Finance Bill returns to this House, will the Government bring forward measures to tighten up on the flow of dirty Russian money in the UK? Or is the truth really that he's perfectly content with this because so much of it appears to end up in Tory party coffers?
Prime Minister.
No, Madam Deputy Speaker, we do not accept foreign donations, as she knows very well. And what we will do is bring forward targeted sanctions, which I think are the most effective way of doing it, targeting the sanctions at the personalities that surround President Putin and making them understand the price that they will pay.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there's no public appetite for using UK combat troops in Ukraine, absolutely none, but we do have other tools in our toolbox. Is the Prime Minister contemplating using the full spectrum approach to cyber, including offensive cyber, that he talked about in March in connection with the integrated review?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, the NCSC, the National Security Cybersecurity Centre, is indeed offering help to Ukraine for precisely that purpose. Russian cyber attacks, as the House knows, can be extremely damaging, and we can do a lot to help.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Government's position is that sanctions will be deployed against Russia if there is an incursion. But would the Government consider deploying some sanctions now as a clear signal to Russia and to say if President Putin stands down his troops and withdraws his forces, then further sanctions will not be deployed? Would that not be a more effective sequencing of the process?
I thank him for his thoughtful argument. We already have, as I've said, Madam Deputy Speaker, we already have Magnitsky sanctions, various sanctions already in place on the Russian regime, sanctions in response to the seizure of Crimea and Sevastopol, already in place, a wide variety of sanctions. I think what we need to do, if I may say so, is build up that instant automatic package of sanctions, of Western sanctions, that will come in automatically in the event of a single toe cap of a Russian incursion into more of Ukraine.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the robust sentiment behind my right honourable friend's statement. And indeed, it's important that the unity across this House is expressed in opposition to Putin if we are going to make a reality of that. But my right honourable friend mentioned in his opening remarks Bosnia, and he will be aware of the sabre rattling happening in Republika Srpska, encouraged by Russia. He will also be aware that there is still occupied territory in Moldova. And could he reassure me that these areas are also under discussion with the Allies?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an excellent, Madam Deputy Speaker, I say, makes an excellent point. And this crisis around Ukraine is one that will be replayed across the whole map of Eastern Europe. Madam Deputy Speaker, if we fail now and if we don't stand up to Putin. She's entirely right about what she says about the Balkans.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Not just Ukraine. We have military forces in Estonia. Estonia is a member of NATO and a true friend of the UK. The Prime Minister said that if Russia invades Ukraine, we will then bolster up our NATO allies. Should we not have more forces in Estonia now?
A very good point, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been to see the 850 troops in Tapa. I'm sure he has as well. They do a fantastic job in Estonia. What we're looking to do is potentially to increase our presence in the NATO southeastern flank as well.
Bernard Jenkin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement, which puts the United Kingdom at the forefront of the response to President Putin's monstrous military intimidation?
Yeah.
And can he personally pledge himself to the defence of the new democracies of Eastern Europe who suffered under the Soviet yoke for so long and still want to be free? And will he acknowledge that this cannot be a change just if the invasion takes place? The change must happen anyway. We must make sure that we are prepared in a new Cold War against this kind of intimidation until the Russian regime is removed.
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend, and I know that he speaks for many friends and many good allies in Eastern Europe, in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in the Baltic states. There are people who would precisely echo his sentiments, and that's why we have to stand strong and united today for Ukraine.
Neil Coyle.
The Prime Minister describes Ukraine and Russia as equal parties, and we know he likes a party, but he also said Ukraine scarcely known a day of peace since the 2014 Russian invasion and illegal annexation. Indeed, in December there were 128 shellings of Ukrainians in Donetsk, and 3 Ukrainian soldiers have been murdered by Russian-backed forces since January. So the question is, why has he not acted sooner? And why is he even now saying we must wait for full-scale invasion before further sanctions, including access to SWIFT and implementing the Moscow Golden Russian Report recommendations, takes place? Why wait?
Prime Minister.
I'm afraid that I think the Honourable Gentleman must have missed what I already said. We already have a very wide package of sanctions in place since the Russian incursion of 2014. We have sanctions, personal sanctions and other sanctions for what they did in Crimea and Sevastopol, and what we're going to do now is ratchet those sanctions up very, very considerably. And I'm afraid he's not right in what he says about leaving Ukraine alone or abandoning Ukraine since 2014. Operation Orbital, the UK has been out there in the front helping to train Ukrainian troops, 21,000 of them since 2015, Madam Deputy Speaker.
James Sunderland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. The Prime Minister will know, of course, that Ukraine is not a full member of NATO. But could I please ask him to comment on the feasibility of direct military action by NATO, notwithstanding that Article 5 does not apply?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him very much, and I want really to go back to the answer I gave to the right honourable gentleman for Bournemouth. I know that many people emotionally will want to commit NATO troops to the defence of Ukraine. We have UK troops there now. Members of the Ranger Regiment are going to supplement those we already have. But I have to say that there is no member of NATO that is currently willing to deploy in Ukraine in large numbers to fight Russian aggression in the way that he suggests. The best thing, and indeed we have to beware of doing things, Madam Deputy Speaker, that would constitute a pretext for Putin to invade. We have to calculate and calibrate what we do very carefully. And I think building a strong package of economic sanctions, continuing to supply defensive weaponry, and all the other things that we're doing, that's the right package.
Stuart Hosey.
Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister said we have already declassified compelling intelligence exposing Russian intent, and he said we will continue to disclose any Russian use of false flag operations or disinformation. How much of that declassified information will be made fully public so as to blunt or halt the spread of Russian disinformation by letting people who see it know that it's false before they decide to press the share or send button?
Minister.
Well, he makes an excellent point, of course, because it's very, very important that people in Ukraine and around the world should be able to trust the information that we're giving out. I've no doubt that the intelligence that we shared about the coup attempt in Kiev was right, or the people who are conspiring against the regime was right. But we will divulge as much of our sourcing as we can without compromising our intelligence sources.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are all naturally alarmed and share concerns at the risks that people of Ukraine face, but take confidence from the Prime Minister's statement and actions in helping coordinate the Western response. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that NATO must always leave the door open for Ukraine joining?
Yes.
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is completely right, and he puts his finger on the fundamental point and the thing that we cannot bargain away. A sovereign country must have the right to choose her own destiny, choose its own. That's what Ukraine must have. Of course, the path to NATO membership will not be easy for anybody, and it's not. No one is saying that is going to happen immediately. But a country must be allowed to choose its own way forward, and that's what we're sticking up for.
Stephen Farrow.
Thank you very much. Any Russian invasion of Ukraine would be a very serious breach of the terms of the United Nations Charter. In 2014, the seizure of Crimea was discussed in the Security Council, I think, on 7 occasions, and eventually a resolution was passed through the General Assembly, which left Russia extremely isolated. So what plans does the government have to pursue this current crisis through the UN, and given the reality of a Russian veto on the Security Council, to perhaps look once again to the General Assembly?
Prime Minister.
I think the honourable gentleman is completely right, and I think that it is an underestimated point in our favour that I don't believe in the end that Russia wants the kind of isolation that would ensue. I think Russia does. One of the global institutions, Russia takes the UN very seriously. Russia values her membership of the UN Security Council. And I think what he proposes about using the General Assembly is entirely right. But it's very important that we not only have tough measures, but we also provide the avenue for diplomacy as well.
Jane Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the Prime Minister for sending such a strong and clear message to Vladimir Putin and for everyone across this House in backing the Prime Minister on such a crucial issue. At such a worrying time, can the Prime Minister reassure British nationals in Ukraine that our embassy in Kiev remains open to provide assistance should they require it?
Minister.
Yes, and I'm very happy to give that reassurance. As I've said just now, the embassy continues to function. At least 30 staff are there to look after British interests in Kiev and around Ukraine.
Luke Pollard.
Mr. Speaker, the Kremlin does not act in isolation, it acts against the plan. So can the Prime Minister set out what additional support we'll be providing to our allies on NATO's eastern flank, especially using UK forces that are already stationed in those countries to deter any future Russian aggression after any invasion of Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
Thank you. Well, he's making a very important point that what we all are discussing at the moment is what we can do to fortify NATO's southeastern flank. The French are looking at Romania. There are questions about Hungary and what we might do there, which of course there are complex issues, as he knows, involving the Hungarian minority in Ukraine. Everybody can see the need now to move NATO forces, particularly the Americans. You heard what I said about the 8,500 troops are getting ready to go to Europe. Everybody can see the need to fortify NATO's eastern flank.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The diplomacy of the velvet glove must be supported by a steel fist if it's to be effective. Does this threat to NATO indirectly inform the Prime Minister that perhaps NATO must spend more money on its conventional forces, and in that regard would he reconsider the cut to our army of 10,000?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we have spent record sums on our wonderful army, and it is more agile, more lethal, more deployable around the world. That's why we're able to move at speed, to deploy not just in Estonia, but as I was saying to the gentleman opposite, we will look to move to other parts of of NATO's eastern frontier as well.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister, the MOD and FCDO Secretary of State for their resolute and strong stance. UK, NATO and USA have committed troops to the Balkan states, to Poland, and to combat and stop Russian aggression, similar support needs to be given to the Ukraine. In the pictures last week in the press, it showed the Ukraine militia training with wooden guns. Can I ask, and very much illustrates the David and Goliath struggle, can the Prime Minister confirm that military assistance and boots on the ground are what is needed urgently and right now in the Ukraine? Thank you.
Yes, I saw those pictures too of Ukrainians training, Ukrainian civilians training with wooden weapons, and I can tell him that we are supporting the Ukrainian army, and there is a strong tradition now in Ukraine of militias, of people who understand how to fight a guerrilla war. And I think the message we need to get across to the Russian people is that this would be a disaster for them and a political disaster for Vladimir Putin.
Jonathan Ginocchia.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In his very strong statement, my right honourable friend quite rightly spoke about the need for Western unity. So of all countries in Europe, it does seem bizarre that Germany needs to be reminded that murderous dictators will never be satisfied with a single land grab, and that any attack on Ukraine is an attack ultimately on all of Europe. Will my right honourable friend be reminding the Germans of this?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend, and he and I have discussed these types of issues over many years. Actually, I think that given the extreme delicacy of the matter in Germany, given the dependence that I've described to the House on Russian hydrocarbons, actually, I really think that Olaf Scholz is doing a huge job of moving and getting us to a position where we have a united Western approach. And that I commend the German government.
Malcolm MacDonald.
I'm grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. For reasons we don't need to go over just now, Germany has blocked some NATO allies from providing certain military assistance to Ukraine. What assessment has the government made of that blocking, and where it is necessary for Ukraine to defend itself, will the UK government, along with others, ensure that it gets the maximum spread of capability that we're able to provide it with?
Prime Minister.
Well, he makes a very important point, of course, but as he knows, and as I've told the House, the NLAWs that we've sent, in addition to all the aid we've given under Operation Orbital, were the second biggest contributor to the defence of, and I stress the defence of Ukraine. And I think I saw a poll of the Ukrainian people which said that the UK was now the most popular government in Ukraine, the foreign government, not second only to the Scottish government, but second only to Lithuania, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Robert Chenrick.
The UK has proven to be the preeminent European nation in supporting and defending the Ukraine, and so I thank my right honourable friend for his leadership on that. Nobody could doubt our commitment to European security, and I've been encouraged by the remarks he's already made with respect to Germany, but it is critical that the German government play a full part if we're going to deliver the unprecedented package of financial and other sanctions that he's described and was set out in the call last night. How confident is he of that, and what more can he do with Chancellor Schulz to ensure that's delivered?
Prime Minister.
He's right. Germany is absolutely critical for our success in this. We've just got to keep the pressure up together.
Leila Moran.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I heard what the Prime Minister said earlier about introducing a register for beneficial interests, but my question to him is when? Because it's been 6 years that it was promised at that dispatch box. He said it to the Leader of the Opposition. 6 years since it was promised. Nothing has happened. Every moment we wait undermines our position. I've laid the bill. It's got support from both sides. Please, will he take it up? We need to send the message that cronies' money is not welcome in this country.
Minister.
She's completely right. In addition to the unexplained wealth orders and the crackdown on tax evasion, we do want to register a beneficial interest. And I can tell her that my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, tells me we will do it as soon as parliamentary time allows.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have a vibrant Ukrainian community in my Colne Valley constituency. I met with many of them earlier this month. Will the Prime Minister please reassure my constituents of our commitment to the defence support package for Ukraine, our readiness to unleash economic sanctions on Russia, and also stand firm for freedom and democracy alongside the Ukrainian people?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the UK has been at this for a long time now, and I think it was an important signal that I hope he will take back to his constituents that we stuck up for Ukrainian rights of navigation when we sent HMS Defender. Through that route, if you remember, the government came under some pressure from people for taking what was described as a provocative route. All we were doing, Madam Deputy Speaker, was sticking up for the rights of freedom of navigation for the Ukrainians.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Russian regime is a clear and present danger to the rules-based international order, so the SNP will be part of the coalition in Ukraine's defence. But in that spirit, would the Prime Minister accept the real frustration on this side of the House that his own credibility, the credibility of his own government and all of us, has been undermined by continued inaction in implementing the Moscow's Gold Report and the Russia Report, we would support the legislation to strengthen his own credibility. Let's get on with it.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think that's fair. The government has been absolutely ruthless in implying Magnitsky sanctions, which his right honourable friend helped to promote. It was my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, who produced them. They're a great thing. We've targeted people involved in the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, and we will use direct targeted sanctions now against the Putin regime.
Speaker, Ukraine has very strong historical and cultural links to my constituency of Kensington, with the Ukrainian Embassy, the Cultural Centre and the Ukrainian Institute, all based in Holland Park. Can my right honourable friend assure me that we will do everything to support the people of Ukraine in their desire to live in peace?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Madam President. I'm familiar with the statue of, I think, St. Volodymyr in her constituency, and I know the amazing contribution of the Ukrainian community to our great capital, and I hope she will pass the message that we stand foursquare with them.
Madam Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A percentage of our natural gas comes from Russia, and Putin has already said that he'll turn off the taps if he deems Moscow to have been unfairly sanctioned by the West. My constituents of Airdrie Shotts are already struggling with rising fuel costs, and that's why I voted in the SNP increasing cost of living debate yesterday. Does the Prime Minister accept that he must bring in a package of policies to help families pay for bills on the domestic front so that this international issue does not compound the problem?
Prime Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy, she's quite right to draw attention to the price spike in energy around the world. Actually, Russian gas only comprises 3% of the UK's gas supplies, but what we've got to do is mitigate the impacts on families of the costs of energy with all the cold weather payments, everything that we're doing to increase the living wage, all the support that we're giving families throughout the winter and beyond.
Sheriff Farah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I commend my right honourable friend on his tough statement. The point has already been made about the disinformation that is coming from the Kremlin, but my right honourable friend will appreciate that a lot of that is targeted towards NATO itself. Would he use this opportunity to make it absolutely clear that NATO is a defensive organisation and that it should not in any way be construed as being offensive or threatening?
Yes, I thank my right honourable friend, and he is so right, because that is the misconception, whether it is witting or otherwise. Russia persists in the fiction that NATO is somehow an aggressive alliance and a threat to Russia. NATO is not an aggressive alliance. Russia is not encircled by threats, and it is absolutely vital that we convey that to Vladimir Putin. And I think if he can understand that, that is the route to progress, and that is the diplomatic path that we've got to follow.
Dr. Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister will get every support for defending national self-determination from these benches within Europe. But does he not agree it's now time that the UK Government sign a robust security and defence agreement with the European Union to replace that signed in the Lisbon Treaty, critically, Article 42.7?
Prime Minister.
I thank him. Actually, if you look at what's happening, the conversation that I had last night with European partners comprised the vast bulk of defence spending in the West, and we work very closely with our European partners, as we do with all our NATO partners, and NATO remains the primary vehicle for our defence, and NATO is a very valuable interlocutor with Russia, and the NATO-Russia Council has proved its worth in the last few months.
Philip Hollowbone.
This the wake-up call that NATO needs, so that all its members finally meet their obligations to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defence.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is completely right, because I think, as so many colleagues have said, this is not just about Ukraine. This is about the ambition of the Kremlin to seize this moment to try to reimpose a new order, a new security architecture in the European continent, one that we absolutely reject. Madam Deputy. We stand for the rights of free peoples everywhere to determine their own fate. That was the fantastic achievement of the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, that high moment in 1990 when we had a Europe whole and free. That's what we're trying to protect.
Last question, Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are reports of some Ukrainians beginning to stock up in non-perishable goods. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the Government has plans in place to support provision of necessities to ordinary Ukrainian people if necessary?
Of course, we will do what we can to provide economic support in the event of a disaster, but the most important thing we can do now is try to prevent that disaster from occurring. That is by unifying the West in the way that I've been describing this afternoon.
Order. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement. I'm sorry not everybody could get in, but we do have to move on to the next business. Order, Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since the Paymaster General responded to the urgent question, it has been reported that the Metropolitan Police actually want the full Grey report to be published and are surprised at the Government's position. Now, given what the Paymaster General told the House about the Government cooperating with the police, if this is confirmed, then we would expect them to do so. But can you give us guidance, Madam Deputy Speaker, about what the House can do to enforce that if they do not?